Hey everyone, welcome back into another edition of the DrBicuspid.com podcast. My name is Kevin Henry, editor-in-chief for Dr. Bicuspid, and thrilled once again to be joined by a good friend of mine as well as an HR expert in dentistry, and that is Alan Twigg. Alan, what's up, my friend?
Hey, Mr. Kevin. Great to be back with you. And yeah, I hope folks are finding these helpful. Looking forward to diving in again.
Absolutely. And I want to make sure people listen to the first two that we did in this series. This is a series of six HR scenarios, case studies, shall we say, that hopefully are going to help keep you out of any kind of hot water. So make sure you're going back on drbicuspid.com podcast and listening to the first two dental HR case studies. And my friend, I'm ready for another one today. And I know that this one involves a secondary practice location, I believe.
Yep, this is one that we are seeing a lot of, or the scenario is coming up a lot. So it's the scenario where a dentist was retiring and so sold the practice to another dentist in the area. So that dentist now had two locations. And the way that it was structured was this dentist and his office manager then were overseeing both of the locations. So kind of a centralized management system. His CPA set up a separate tax ID number, separate payroll account. So both practices were run under separate tax IDs, separate payroll systems, and so on. Most of the employees worked at just one location or the other, but there were a few employees who would cross over and work some hours at each office. And the doctor was hit with a wage and hour claim for unpaid overtime. And this ended up affecting not only this one employee that the claim was related to, but it ended up resulting in an investigation and leading to some other penalties and overtime fines as well. So one of these situations where really important, and of course becoming more and more common as more dentists are consolidating and forming these kind of small little groups.
And it's really good to know because I will tell you, I work with dental assistants a lot out there, and I know that some of these brand new DSOs, or as you said, multi location practices, have like a lead dental assistant that goes around to various locations to make sure that the dental assistants are learning and doing what they need to do. And so is in essence like that what we've got to watch out for as a practice owner?
Yeah, so a little bit more background on this particular one. So the employee that filed the claim had been working at one office, working about 22 hours a week, and at the other office, 23 hours a week. So individually, she was well below the overtime threshold of 40 hours per week. So that's what confused the doctor the most, was kind of, why am I getting an overtime claim if she's working well under 40? The reason was that the government looked at this as, in a sense, one business or one entity. And because 22 plus 23 is 45, that's above that overtime threshold of 40. And that's what sparked the claim. Now, let's get into the why. So this is a great example of kind of the differences between HR laws and accounting or tax laws. What the CPA did by setting up separate tax ID numbers, separate payroll accounts, totally appropriate, totally fine, exactly what should have happened. That is not an issue at all. But what happens when someone has multiple tax ID numbers is most dentists kind of get in their minds that these are separate businesses. And we hear that all the time. They're separate businesses, separate tax ID numbers, separate payroll accounts. And so in their minds, they think, well, these are just separate businesses. So therefore, overtime doesn't matter, scheduling doesn't matter. They're just totally and completely separate. And what the government looks at in terms of this topic and this idea of joint employer and when do we kind of bundle all of the employees or all the locations together, they look at a number of factors. For example, they look at whether these individual offices are sharing equipment. That one doesn't come into play as much in a dental practice because you don't, move an x-ray machine from one office to another. They will also look at shared materials. So are one or more of the locations all under one employee handbook, for example? And that one is very common because for efficiency, of course, you want all employees to get the same benefits and similar policies because it just makes everything a lot easier. The biggest criteria that is looked at is all about, in a sense, who has the HR control, who is making the HR decisions. So who decides who gets fired, who gets hired, who gets a raise, a promotion, In this particular case, it was the doctor and the office manager who were kind of the central leaders for both of these locations. So the two of them were in control of everything at all times for both offices. And because it was centralized control, that's why the government saw this as basically one business entity. Because if it was the case, we see this, for example, let's say you have two locations. One office is run by one spouse who's a dentist, the other office is run by another spouse who is also a dentist, and the two of them don't work together at all. Maybe one of them's a GP, one of them's an orthodontist, and they have their own employees, their own management. They each make the decision and the control for their own office, and there's no sort of colluding. There's no saying, "Hey, who do you think should get a raise?" It's all just separate.
Okay.
That is a different scenario than this particular case because the control and the HR decision making was all centralized. So that is what led to this particular case being what it was. The government basically said, because you're centralizing the control and the management, we are going to treat you as basically one business, and therefore this employee, we added up the hours, therefore they're over overtime and so on. Now, another thing that is really important for folks to keep in mind with this beyond overtime, and this didn't come up in this particular case, but it very much can. I think folks are aware that HR rules vary based on how many employees you have.
Yeah.
And so let's say you're in a state like, for example, here in Oregon, the sick leave changes from unpaid to paid once you have 10 or more employees. So if you have two locations and each location, let's say one location has 6 employees, one location has 7, individually we're below that threshold. But if you add them together, now we're above 10. And so if we have this kind of centralized control and HR decision-making process, then the state, in that case, would most likely look at you as one business with 13 employees. Therefore, your sick leave has to be handled in that particular way. So that's another really important thing. We see that come into play with larger groups where maybe they individually, all the locations are below 50 employees, but added together, they're above 50. So now the federal FMLA kicks in. So again, just a bunch of really important stuff for folks to be mindful of.
Yeah, and I know laws can vary state to state, and it's amazing they can vary size to size as well. And I think that that's something maybe that can be overlooked. So it's important to know that.
Yep, definitely.
I want to go back to what I asked a minute ago about the dental assistant traveling to different practices. Does the time that she's in the car count as work time as well? Does that need to be factored in her hours?
Great question. So the answer is, unfortunately, to a lot of this stuff is the answer is it depends. So it depends on where she's coming from, where she's going to, and what the schedule is. So let's do a couple examples. So let's say she is leaving her house and driving to one of the practices. That time is not considered work time. That's just normal commuting. Let's say she is scheduled to work in the morning at one office and then the afternoon at a different office. In that scenario, the time that she's driving from office A to office B, that is considered work time and needs to be factored in. And then let's say she leaves office B and she drives home, that time is then normal commute time that is not paid. Now, there is a little bit of a caveat there where let's say an employee works 99.9% of their time at office A. And so that is their normal work site. That's where they do most of their work. Their normal commuting there is what it is. Let's say that the practice says, okay, today it's a special day. You're going to go to office B today. And let's say that the commute from their house to office B is significantly longer than the commute time to office A. In that scenario, we would recommend that they pay for the difference. So let's say the normal commute time to office A is 30 minutes. The commute time to office B is 60 minutes. We would we'd recommend subtracting that and adding, in a sense, an additional 30 minutes of drive time pay in that scenario. And so again, it just depends on the situation, depends on, again, scheduling and that kind of thing.
I know there's so much to navigate whenever it comes to HR, whenever it comes to individual state laws and everything else. And that's why I'm so glad you and Ben Erickson are on top of this and are out there to help dentists and dental team members really navigate through all this. So what are some resources that you'd offer if people want more information, or they, they've got a question about that Office A and Office B and how that may work where they are?
Yeah, definitely. If folks out there have multiple locations or they're just curious about this, or if maybe you're thinking about going down that path of having multiple locations, happy to chat with you. So folks can reach out to us at benerickson.com or our 800 number. And if you're not already a client, then we can chat with you. We can still chat with you about this topic. We can do billable calls and one-time consultations and whatnot. And I'm also just happy to chat with folks about their situation or what they're thinking and just kind of throw some ideas around. So yeah, happy to reach out and talk with folks for sure.
And if you're watching this on Dr. Bicuspid, all this is going to be in the article. If you're listening to this through the drbicuspid.com podcast network, check out the show notes because the link to Ben Erickson and to reach Alan will be in there as well. So, my friend, as always, thanks for your insight and expertise. It is needed so much right now, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share with our audience.
Absolutely. You bet, Kevin. Thanks for having me. And we're always happy to share all this crazy HR stuff.
And hey, before we sign off, I want to make sure people know you've got a podcast as well. I want
This is
to
true.
point people toward that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. We started this last year. It's been really well received. It's called the Dental HR Podcast, and we just take little snippets every few weeks, and we talk about various HR topics, and it's everything from pregnancy, harassment, hiring, firing, bonus systems, all kinds of different topics, all in that HR space. We just do them, a couple times a month. And they're just easy and fun, and we try to break everything down so it's approachable for folks. So yeah, folks can check that out. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the places, and it's just called the Dental HR Podcast.
And guess what? We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well, just so that you've got it. So, Alan, thanks again, my friend. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks to all of you who've listened to this episode of the drbicuspid.com podcast. Love bringing in the experts to help make sure that you keep your practice on the straight and narrow. Until next time, Kevin Henry, editor-in-chief for Dr. Bicuspid, signing off. And as always, wishing you nothing but success.